One moment. Okay. So the concept, nature, and characteristics of taxation and the taxes. Okay? So hindi porket ang mindset kasi ng mga tao, especially the Filipinos, are taxes are bad. Okay? That taxes are burden for us Filipinos. That is not the case. Okay? Actually, taxes is what we pay for to have a civilized society. The reason why we have laws, the reason why we have police force, we have army, we have judge, we have justice system, we have the government is because of our taxes that we pay to the government. Right? And we define taxation based on these two concepts. One is as a process. Okay? It is the mean by which the sovereign, which is our state or our government, through its lawmaking body, meaning our Congress and our House of Representatives and our Senate, raises revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So sabi nga, syempre hindi ka naman makakapagpatakbo ng gobyerno pag walang pondo, right? Hingi tayo ng hingi sa gobyerno, ang nangyayari, ayaw naman nating magbayad ng tax. Okay? So it is basically the expenses that we pay for, yung mga gastusin ng mga government employee, yung mga pasweldo sa government employees, pinabayad yan sa tax natin. Okay? It is merely a way of appropriating the cost of the government among those who in some measures are privileged to enjoy its benefit and must bear its burden. So meaning, okay, the reason why we have an existing government is because of the taxes. Dahil hindi naman tayo tatakbo, hindi tatakbo ang ating gobyerno kung walang nagbabayad ng buwis. That's the reason why the BIR will really penalize you if you are not paying your taxes. Just such as what happened to Mighty Cigarette. If you are familiar with the Mighty Corporation, ito yung nagbebenta ng sigarilyo, yung manufacturer ng sigarilyo at hindi sila nagbabayad ng tax. So what happened? The government sequestered. Okay? The government sequestered the said business kasi hindi sila nagbabayad ng buwis. Okay? And number two, as a power, taxation refers to the inherent power of the state to demand enforced contribution for the public purpose or purposes. Okay? There are three types of inherent power of the state. Ibig sabihin ng inherent power, hindi mo kailangan ng batas. Okay? Hindi necessarily that the power is in the Constitution. Ibig sabihin kung meron kang gobyerno, okay, ang gobyerno mo ay may tatlong kapangyarihan na inherent sa kanya. And what are those three powers? Anyone? Sino ba dito nakapag-constitutional law na? Meron ba kayong constitutional law? Political law?
Wala pa, sir. Di pa.
Wala. Okay.
Apo.
So the government or the state has three inherent power. Pag sinabi natin inherent, hindi kailangan ng batas. Okay? Para magkaroon ng sinasabing kapangyarihan ng gobyerno. And what are those three powers? Number one is the eminent domain. Pag sinabi natin eminent domain, the government owns all the properties. Okay? Owns all the lands in the Philippines. Okay? So basically, sir, paano 'yon? Merong mga lupa na ang pag-aari ay hindi naman gobyerno, ang may-ari ng lupa ay private citizen or corporation. That power, that ownership is actually a privilege given by the government. Binigay ng gobyerno ang isang individual ng pribileyo na magkaroon ng karapatan para mag-ari ng lupa. Now, pag ang gobyerno ginamit ang kanyang kapangyarihan ng eminent domain, meaning pwede niyang bawiin, okay, pwede niyang kunin yung lupa na yon, okay, sa private citizen or even sa private institution or corporation. In exchange of a just compensation. Hindi pwedeng kunin ng gobyerno yung lupa na pag-aari ng isang pribado, okay, nang walang just compensation. Okay? Okay. Reminder lang doon sa mga nakapatay ang camera, Paki-turn on yung mga yan. I don't want to cite your names. Okay. Okay, then the second power of the state is the police power. Okay, what is the police power? Okay, it is the power to enforce laws, to restrict the rights of a citizen. Okay, sabi nga natin, meron tayong freedom of speech. May karapatan tayong magsalita na unrestricted, right? But that freedom is not absolute. Why? If your freedom encroaches, okay, a right of another person, therefore that freedom is already, okay, can be prohibited by the government or can be restricted by the government. And what are those rights or what are those cases? So for example, nilibel mo. What is libel? Siniraan mo. Siniraang puri mo ang isang tao gamit ang social media. Sinabihan mo, let's say, ang isang tao na magnanakaw yan, hindi nagbabayad ng utang. Okay? Kahit totoo yung inaakusa mo sa kanya, okay, it is already a violation of the right of another person. Kahit totoo yung sinasabi mo. Therefore, you are subject to what? Sa mga mahilig sa social media dyan, so you are violating the cyber libel. Okay, may libel tayo, cyber. So pag pinost mo sa social media yan, pwede kang ma-cyber libel. And a cyber libel is heavier, has a heavier punishment than a normal libel in accordance to the revised penal code. And lastly, we have the power of taxation, meaning the government can, okay, tax all of your, okay, properties, properties and income. The government can tax you those privileges that you have. The government can even tax you 100% of your income. That is an inherent power of the state. Okay? But the laws that we have, okay, yung mga batas na meron tayo patungkol sa taxation actually prevents the government to implement 100% taxation. Right? Yung mga batas natin, yan talaga yung nagre-restrict, yan yung naglilimit sa gobyerno para hindi kunin ng 100% yung ating income o yung ating kabuhayan. Right? So that is how you look at it. Okay, next. Okay, rationality of taxation. The Supreme Court held that it is said that taxes are what we paid for a civilized society. Without taxes, the government would be paralyzed for lack of motive power to activate or operate it. Hence, despite the natural reluctance to surrender part of one's hard-earned income to taxing authority, every person who is able must contribute his share in the running of the government. The government, for its part, is expected to respond in the form of tangible and intangible benefit intended to improve the lives of the people and enhance their moral and material values. Okay? It is a symbiotic relationship is the rationale for taxation and should dispel the erroneous notion that it is an arbitrary method of taxation by those in seeking power. Ito yung sinasabi natin. Wait, mag-mute. One moment. Okay. So, hindi natin dapat sinasabi, yung gobyerno na yan, walang ginagawa yan kung hindi mag-tax lang ng mag-tax, kinukurakot naman nila, dapat hindi na tayo magbayad ng buwis. Right? Isa yung maling prospektiba. Hindi dapat yan yung prospektibo natin pagdating sa taxation. Okay? Dapat ang iniisip natin bilang isang citizen or bilang isang mamamayan ng Pilipinas, obligasyon natin na magbayad tayo ng buwis. Okay? Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na hindi tayo magbabayad ng buwis kasi yung gobyerno natin corrupt. Mali. Tayo ay dapat obligasyon nating magbayad ng buwis. Tayo ang nagkakamali kasi bumoboto tayo ng corrupt, ng mga tayo ang bumoboto ng corrupt na mga politiko. So tayo ang may kasalanan kung bakit nakukorrupt yung tax na binabayad sa atin. Okay? Kaya sa susunod na eleksyon, katatapos lang ng eleksyon, no? Sa susunod na eleksyon, okay, boto nyo sa Senado, Adrian and Taso, joke lang. Okay, sa susunod na eleksyon, okay, mag-isip-isip kayo, iboto nyo kung sino yung walang bahid ng korupsyon. Actually, yung sinasabi nila na walang bahid ng korupsyon, pag nakapwesto na yan, mangungurap din yan. Kaya sa susunod na eleksyon, kung kayo po ay magiging botante, hindi lang pang nasyonal, pati pang lokal, siguraduhin nyo na yung iuupo nyo sa gobyerno ay hindi corrupt. So ibig sabihin, pag-aralan nyo, hindi porket pogi, di ba? Hindi porket pogi, yun ang iboboto nyo. Hindi porket favorite color nyo pink, yun ang iboboto nyo. Right? Hindi porket may ibang sikat ang pangalan, yun ang iboboto nyo. Kailangan nyong mag-research, lalo na kayo, mga edukadong tao kayo. May mga pinag-aralan kayo. Okay? Okay, next. Okay, taxation is a symbiotic relationship whereby in exchange for the protection that a citizen gets from the government, tax are paid. Ito yung sinasabi natin. Kaya tayo may pulis, kaya tayo may sundalo, kaya tayo may mga korte na nagpoprotekta sa karapatan ng bawat Pilipino, okay? Kaya tayo merong ganyan is because of the taxes that we are paying. Kaya tayo merong kalsada, kaya kahit baku-baku yung kalsada natin, okay? Kailangan nating magbayad ng buwis. Okay? Lalo na sa inyo, lahat kayo scholar. Kung hindi dahil sa buwis na binabayad ng mga kagaya naming kumikita, okay? Wala kayong pang-tuition, wala rin kayong pambayad sa kagaya kong professor. Right? Kahit medyo mataas masyado yung binabayad sa akin, di ba? Pero ibig sabihin, because of the taxes that is being paid, meron kayong free education. Kaya kayo, huwag niyong sayangin yung edukasyon na binibigay sa inyo ng libre. Okay? Okay, kaya huwag kayong magalit sa tax. Magbayad kayo ng buwis kasi yan ang sweldo namin. Yan din ang pinagpapaaral sa inyo. Okay, so purpose and objective of taxation. So revenue. At number 1, the purpose of taxation is revenue. Kita. Okay? Kita. Okay? Kita ng gobyerno. Dahil yan ang ginagamit ng gobyerno para mag-operate siya. So revenue to provide funds or property with which the state promotes the general welfare and protection of its citizen. Okay? So that's one of the purpose to have a revenue. Number 2 is non-revenue. There are revenue para syempre meron pang gastos ang gobyerno, meron ding non-revenue. In that non-revenue is number 1 to promote the general welfare. Later we will discuss. To regulate, okay, to reduce social inequity, encourage economic growth, and protectionism. So later we will discuss. So let's go back. What is promotion of a general welfare? Taxation may be used as an implement of police power, right? In order to promote the general welfare of the people. Okay? Ano yon? Anong example nun? So example, alam nyo ba yung sin tax? Sin tax ay binubuwisan mo ng mataas ang mga alak, ang mga sigarilyo. Noong unang panahon, nung kabataan ko, no? Ang isang kaha ng sigarilyo ay umaabot lamang ng 40 pesos per pack. 40 pesos per pack lang, college ako noon. Right? Nagtatrabaho na ako, 40 pesos. Napakamura ng sigarilyo dito sa Pilipinas because we are one of the top producers of tobacco. Kaya mura lang ang sigarilyo sa atin. Ngayon pinatupad yung sin tax. Okay? Ang sigarilyo ngayon, same brand, ay umaabot na ng 160 pesos. At next year magiging 175 pesos na siya. Okay, most of the increase is because of the sin tax. Tinataasan ang buwis sa mga produktong nakakasama sa kalusugan, okay, to regulate, okay, for the general welfare of the society. Kasi kung mura yan, edi maraming sunog baga. Right? Nung kabataan ko, ang gin bulag 20 pesos lang hanggang 25 pesos. Okay, 20 pesos to 25 pesos. Ngayon, ang huling balita ko, ang gin bulag, ang bilog ay 80 pesos na yata. Right? Yun ang balita ko lang. Okay? Next, hindi na kasi ako nag-gin bulag. Yung bilog. Yan. Hindi na ako umiinom ng Ginebra San Miguel. Ano na ako? Johnny Walker. Hindi, joke lang. Johnny Walker na ang iniinom ko. Okay, joke lang. Next, regulation. Okay, as in the case of taxes levied on excise and privilege, like those imposed in tobaccos or alcohol, or amusement places like nightclubs, cabaret, cockpits. So it is almost the same with general welfare, but one of the purpose also is to regulate. The reason why you are increasing the tax of those products is to regulate. Okay? So amusement places, ano ba yung mga yung amusement places? So yan yung mga bar, right? Diba? Alam niyo kung bakit may tissue, 'di ba? Yung beer, ay hindi niyo pa alam, masyado pa kayong bata. Saka natin i-discuss 'yun. Okay? So basically, cabarets, nightclub. So yung mga iniinom niyo diyan, bakit mahal ang beer doon sa cabaret, sa nightclub? Kasi nga merong amusement tax na binabayaran. You regulate it because, okay, it is excessive, it is a privilege. Okay? Bakit yung pagsakay sa eroplano may binabayaran kang airport tax? Okay? Or travel tax, right? Because of you want to regulate. Siyempre, bubuwisan mo yung may kakayanan na lumipad ng eroplano, magpalipad sa eroplano. May kakayanan na mag-travel, right? So you regulate it. Next is reduction of social inequity. Okay? This is made possible through progressive taxation of where the objective is to prevent the under-concentrated or the wealth of the wealth in the hands of a few individuals. So napansin nyo, pag ang sweldo mo is for 1 year is less than 250,000 pesos, okay? Tax-free ka, wala kang babayaran buwis. Sa income tax, marami tayong taxes, hindi lang yung income tax. Pero kung ang sweldo mo is less than 250,000 pesos per year, okay? Tax-free ka. Ang tax na binabayaran mo ay 0%. But if you exceed, okay, if you exceed 250,000 pesos per year, that's the time that you will have a tax. So from 251,000 pesos up to, I think, 400,000 pesos, you will be subjected to a 20% tax. Okay? Doon sa difference ng 250. So for example, ang sweldo mo ay 300,000 pesos per year minus 250. So meron kang difference na 50,000 pesos. That 50,000 pesos is subject to 20% tax. Okay? Then I think if you exceed about 400 to 800, then you will be taxed 25%. So those that is how you compute your taxation. Later, I think at the end of this subject, we will at the end of this at the end of I think by midterm, I will be teaching you on how to compute your income tax. Kailangan yung malaman yan kasi in the future definitely magtatrabaho kayo pare-pareha. Okay? Next is to encourage economic growth. Okay? In the realm of taxation, tax exemption and tax relief, for instance, the purpose is to grant incentive or exceptions in order to encourage investment and thereby promote the country's economic growth. Okay. An example of this, sino dito yung mga nagtatrabaho sa call center? Taas nga ang kamay, may nagtatrabaho. Okay. So yung mga nagtatrabaho sa call center, di ba? may mga option na work from home. Right? May mga option na work from home. Pero bakit yung mga call center, nakakatipid sila sa work from home? Sobrang tipid sila sa work from home. Bakit? Hindi sila nagbabayad ng kuryente. Wala silang aircon na binabayaran. Yung internet, kanya-kanya. Right? Yung empleyado nila, sigurado pang nagre-report kasi hindi na nag-umaalis ng bahay. Pero bakit pa rin pinababalik sila sa mga opisina? Because, okay, those worker or the offices of those call centers or of those BPO companies is in a PESA zone or Philippine Economic Zone Authority. Meaning, those companies are, because they invested in the Philippines, they are receiving tax incentive. Meaning, yung tax na binabayaran nila is mas mababa sa isang normal na nag-i-invest dito sa Pilipinas. That's the reason why they want those people, they want those companies to ask their employee to return back to the offices. Okay, kasi those offices are also paying taxes or also enjoying tax incentive. Okay, but I think concentric is looking for opting out doon sa kanilang tax incentive sa PESA because they think that mas masaya yung kanilang mga empleyado sa working from home. Okay? So yun. So for if you are in a PESA zone, for example, in Cavite, there is a PESA zone in Cavite. So yung mga industriya or all the investments or the businesses in the PESA zone in Cavite, in Batangas, and in Laguna, okay, meron silang exception or meron silang tax break or tax benefit na na-encourage, na na-receive because of this kind of objective of taxation. And lastly, you have protectionism. Okay, in some important sectors of the economy, as in case of foreign importation, taxes sometimes provide protectionism to local industry like protective tariffs and customs. Okay. So, anong ibig sabihin nito? Kung napansin nyo, may mga imported products na kailangan magbayad ng buwis. Okay, kailangan nilang magbayad ng buwis ng mas malaki o yung importation tax or yung tinatawag nating tariff or custom tax. Right? It is to protect the local industry, to protect our local products. Right? Kaya hindi ka basta-basta pwedeng mag-import, especially if the one that you're importing is the main product of the Philippines. Okay. For example, bakit walang napakahirap bumili ng Ferrari dito sa Pilipinas? Bakit napakamahal ng mga supercar dito sa Pilipinas? The reason is we are protecting our number one, it's a luxury, so it is to regulate. And number two, protectionism. Kasi noong unang panahon, meron tayong local automobile dito sa Pilipinas. Pero dahil nawala na yata yung local automobile natin dito sa Pilipinas, so I don't know why meron pa rin laurel tax na tinatawag para hindi ka basta-basta makakapag-import. Another is, for example, yung alam naman natin na ang China napakababa ng cost of labor nila doon, kaya napakamura ng produkto na dinadala nila, na binebenta nila dito sa Pilipinas. So para hindi masyadong tayo mga Pilipino, especially napaka price sensitive natin, we opt to choose cheaper products than local products, right? So kung local nga pero mahal naman, ipupunta na lang ako sa China. China products na lang ang bibilin ko, right? Kasi mas mura, napaka price sensitive natin, right? So because of that, what usually the government is doing is to put taxes on imports para hindi masyadong masaktan yung mga local manufacturers natin dito sa Pilipinas. Diba? Kaya nga bawal yung nag-import ng sibuyas, nag-import ng carrots, right? So inaano ng gobyerno yan kasi nga nasasaktan yung mga local farmers natin dito sa Pilipinas. Okay? Especially mga smuggled yung karamihan doon. Okay? Next. Okay, taxes. Taxes are the enforced proportional contribution from persons and properties levied by the lawmaking bodies of the state by virtue of its sovereignty for the support of the government and for public needs. Okay? So that's basically the simplest definition of taxation. It is an enforced proportional contribution from persons and property levied by the lawmaking body of the state by virtue of its sovereignty for the support of the government and for public needs. Okay? Enforced proportional contribution. Ibig sabihin, walang exception. Okay? Enforced. Okay? Next is property levied, meaning yung ating hard-earned money, hard-earned labor. Levied by whom? By the lawmaking body. And who is the lawmaking body of the Philippines? There are two branches. Okay? First is the lower house or our House of Representatives, yung ating mga congressman. Okay? Next is our Senate, which is the Senate of the Philippines. Right? And by virtue of its sovereignty, meaning the government, to support the government's public needs. And what are those public needs? Siyempre, public services, salaries of the employees of the government, and other programs that they have. Okay? Next. Essential characteristics of taxes. So one is it levies by the lawmaking body of the state. Okay, kaya kayo, pag tinaksan kayo, tumaas ang buwis nyo, huwag kayong magagalit sa presidente. Magalit kayo din sa mga congressman nyo, saka dun sa mga senador nyo. Kasi sila yung nag-approve. Kahit gusto ng presidente yon, kung ayaw ng Senado, ayaw ng Kongreso, ayaw ng mga congressman nyo, hindi matutupad yung batas na yon. Okay? So pare-pare silang may kasalanan kung tataas or bababa ang buwis natin. Okay? Next, the power to tax is a legislative power which under the Constitution only the Congress can exercise through the enactment of laws. Accordingly, the obligation to pay taxes is a statutory liability. Okay, ang ibig sabihin nito, okay, ayon sa ating konstitusyon, ang pwede lang maggumawa ng batas para tayo ay buwisan ay ang Kongreso. At sabi ko nga, ang Kongreso ay hindi yung congressman natin. Ang Kongreso ay composed of two houses. You have the House of Representatives or the lower house, and you have the upper house or the Senate of the Philippines. And sabi nga natin, taxes is a statutory liability. Lahat tayo nire-require ng batas na magbayad ng buwis. Walang exempted. Okay? Pero doon sa mga exemptions which is stated by the law. Next. It is an enforced contribution. Okay? A tax is not a voluntary payment or donation to the government. Akala nung, donasyon ko sa gobyerno. Right? No, it is a voluntary payment. It is not a voluntary payment and it is not a donation. It is not dependent on the will or contractual assent expressed or implied of the person taxed. Okay? Taxes are not contracts but positive acts of the government. That's the reason why kung meron kunyari isa kang negosyante tapos binuwisan ka ng gobyerno, okay, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, teka lang, magdidemanda muna ako sa korte, questioning ko muna kung yung tax mo sa akin tama o mali. No. Pag ikaw ay may dispute pagdating sa tax, bayad ka muna ng tax, after mo magbayad, saka ka mag-dispute. Right? Bayad ka muna bago ka mag-complain sa korte. And most probably the court will not decide or the court will refrain from making tax laws unconstitutional because of the inherent power of the state, okay, to tax its people or its citizen. Next. It is generally payable in money. Okay? A tax is a pecuniary burden, an extraction to be discharged alone in the form of money, which must be in a legal tender, okay, unless qualified by law, such as RA 304, which allows back pay certificates as payment for taxes. Okay. So usually pag naniningil ang gobyerno ng tax ay pera. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin dun sa gobyerno na, sir, magseserbisyo na lang po ako sa inyo yung para bilang kabayaran sa tax ko. No. In a general term, okay, taxes are paid by money. Okay? Next. It is proportionate in character. Okay? It is ordinarily based on taxpayers' ability to pay. Okay? The taxpayer's ability to pay. So meaning, tayo, kung ano yung kaya mong kitain, doon din base yung buwis. Right? Kaya nga yung 250,000 pesos per year and below, sila hindi na tinataksan ng gobyerno kasi sinasabi ng gobyerno hindi na nila kaya magbayad kasi ang baba na nga ng kita nila. So zero tax na sila. Okay? Samantalang yung kumikita ng mas malaki doon, kailangan nilang magbayad ng mas malaki because they have the capacity or ability to pay more to the government. Okay? Next, it is levied on a person's or property. A tax may also be imposed on acts, transactions, rights, and privileges. So tax may also be imposed on acts. What are those acts? Nag-travel ka. You can be taxed on that. Right? Nagpunta ka ng beer house, pwede magbabayad sa bill mo, merong amusement tax. Manonood ka ng sinihan, merong amusement tax na binabayaran. Transactions such as value-added tax, right? Right now, our value-added tax is 12% of the amount that we are purchasing. Rights. What are the rights? The right to have a land. Okay? Nagbabayad ka ng amilyar. Okay? What else? Privileges. So let's say high-end ka, ang bag mo is Louis Vuitton, right? So you pay additional tax for that. Okay? Or sa paggamit ng pagbili ng sasakyan, meron kang binabayarang privilege tax on that. Okay? Kaya nga mas mahal ng sasakyan ngayon kasi may karagdagang tax tayong binabayaran. Okay, next. It is levied for public purpose or purposes. Taxation involves and a tax constitutes a burden to provide income for the public purposes. An example of that, lahat kayo makaka-relate, okay? We are paying tax. Kaming mga nagtatrabaho ay nagbabayad ng buwis para sa edukasyon nyo. Dahil wala na kayong binabayarang tuition fee. Okay? So that is a good example of that. Because that is for a public purpose. The reason why may building kayo dyan sa Boni or kung sa Pasig man kayo naka-assign is because of the taxes that our forefathers paid for. Okay? Kaya yung isang universidad na nagsunog ng upuan, right? Nagrally, nagsunog ng upuan, tinapon sa building, dapat talaga makulong yung lintik na yon. Right? Hindi nila pag-aari. Hindi nyo pag-aari ang pader ng CR para sulatan nyo ng kung ano-ano. Okay? Next. It is levied by the state which has jurisdiction over the person or the property. The person's property or services to be taxed must be subject to the jurisdiction of the taxing state. Okay? Ibig sabihin, lahat ng transaksyon mo dito sa Pilipinas, okay, dapat is matax. So kung may transaction ka outside the Philippines, it is already outside the jurisdiction of the state. Another example is yung business tax na binabayad or yung real estate tax. kung ang pag-aari mo ay nasa Quezon City or kung ang ari-arian mo ay nasa Antipolo, right? Kung ari-arian mo ang nasa Antipolo, hindi ka pwedeng singilin ng Mandaluyong ng real estate tax sa ari-arian mo sa Antipolo, right? Because it is already outside the jurisdiction of Mandaluyong, right? So ibig sabihin, if you have a real estate in Antipolo, then the real estate tax of that real estate should be paid in Antipolo and not elsewhere. Next. Okay. Theories and basis of taxation. Okay? Necessity theory. Taxes proceeds upon the theory that the existence of the government is a necessity. Right? Kailangan natin ng gobyerno para magkaroon tayo ng civilized society. Kasi pag walang gobyerno, kagulo tayo, kanya-kanya tayo. Okay? Pag walang gobyerno, walang police, walang judge, edi patayan na lang tayo, nakawa na lang tayo dito. Right? Anarchy. Right? Now, to have order in our society, okay, to have a civilized order in our society, we need to have a government. And to have that government, we need to pay taxes for the expenses of that government. Okay? That it is cannot continue without the means to pay for its expenses. And that for those means, it has the right to compel all its citizens and citizens and properties within its limits to contribute. Yung sinasabi natin kanina, to have a organized civilized society, we need to pay the taxes because operating a country needs expenses. Okay? Or there is an expense in operating a government. Therefore, sino magbabayad nun? Yung mga politiko? Hindi. Hindi naman yan nagpapakamatay dyan sa mga pwesto nila para kumita ng pera. Diba? Hindi sila nagpapakamatay dyan para mag-abono. Siyempre, nagpapakamatay sila dyan para sa public service. Serbisyo. Gusto lang nilang magserbisyo. Kaya sila nagpapakamatay sa mga pwesto nila dyan sa gobyerno. Right? Next. Okay, in a case where the Supreme Court held that taxation is a power eminent from necessity, it is a necessary burden to preserve the state's sovereignty, okay, and a means to give the citizenry an army to exist aggression, a navy to defend its shores from invasion, a corps for a civil servant to serve, public improvement designated for the enjoyment of the citizenry, and those which the state's territory and facilities, and protection which a government is supposed to provide. Okay. So sinabi na natin kanina yan, kaya tayo may militar, meron tayong police, meron tayong mga government employees, okay, is because that is one of the that is the needs of our society to have a civilized society, right? Yan ang kailangan ng ating pamayanan para magkaroon tayo ng isang maayos na komunidad. That's the reason why we have to pay for those services that the government is providing to us. Hindi naman yun libre. Okay? Next. Another theory is what we call the benefits protection theory. The basis of taxation is the reciprocal duty of protection between the state and its inhabitant. In return for the contribution, the taxpayer receives the general advantages and protection which the government affords the taxpayer and his property. So an example of that is, kaya tayo may mga korte, meron tayong mga courts to protect the rights of its citizen. Right? Hindi porket mayaman ka, wala tayong gobyerno, pwede ko nang kunin yung lupa ng kapitbahay ko. No. Right? There are laws, there are courts that protects our rights. Okay? And in exchange for that protection, in exchange of having that civilized society, we have to reciprocate by paying those taxes that it is being asked by the government. Okay? Next. Qualification of a benefit protection theory. It does not mean that only those who are able to pay and do pay taxes can enjoy the privileges and protection given to a citizen by the government. Ito yung sinasabi, dati ito yung sinasabi ko eh. Bakit? Bakit kaming mga middle class, kami pa yung halos hindi nakikinabang sa gobyerno, ang mas pinoprotektahan yung mga may hirap na hindi nagbabayad ng buwis. Right? But before, I was ignorant. Hindi ko alam to. But now, when the Supreme Court held that this is the protection benefit theory, right? It doesn't mean na ikaw yung malaki ang binabayad ng tax, ikaw yung poprotektahan ng gobyerno. Okay? It is equal. The government is protecting us equally. Okay? Hindi porket hindi nagbabayad ng tax yon, eh wala na siyang karapatan. Okay, hindi na siya poprotektahan ng gobyerno. But sabi nga ng ating Korte Suprema, okay, the people who are less in life must have more in law. Right? So ibig sabihin yung mga pobre, yung mga mahihirap, sila dapat yung mas may pina-priority ng ating mga batas. Right? Pero sometimes parang sumusobra na, sometimes lang parang sumusobra lang yung ibibigay na karapatan, but that is what you call equity. Okay? Next. Qualification of another qualification for a benefit protection theory is from the contribution received, the government renders no special or commensurate benefit to any particular property or person. Okay, the only benefit to which the taxpayer is entitled is that derives from his enjoyment of the privileges of living in an organized society established and safeguarded by devotion of taxes to public purposes. So hindi porket ikaw yung nagbabayad ng malaking tax, eh dapat may proteksyon na binibigay sa iyo ang gobyerno. Mali. Okay, sinasabi nga natin na the only benefit for you to pay those taxes is you have a organized, okay, an organized, civilized society. Right? Napoprotektahan yung ari-arian mo, hindi nananakaw yung mga lupa mo. Right? Meron kang kalsadang dinadaanan, na dinadaanan ng lahat. Meron kang airport, di ba? Meron kang korting pwedeng takbuhan, may mga pulis kang pwedeng takbuhan, may militar na nagpoprotekta sa iyo laban sa mga terorista. So yun yung yun yung benepisyo. Okay, hindi porket malaki ang buwis na binabayaran mo, eh dapat mas marami kang proteksyon sa gobyerno. That's not right. Okay, next. A taxpayer cannot object to or resist the payment of taxes solely because no personal benefit to him can be pointed out as arising from the tax. Nasabi natin hindi porket hindi mo nararamdaman yung benepisyo ng tax na binabayad mo, eh pwede mong sabihin, ayoko nang magbayad ng tax. Hindi naman ako nakikinabang niyan. Right? Ang daming negosyante na ganyan ang mindset. Ayoko magbayad ng tax, hindi naman ako nakikinabang niyan. Right? Which is mali. Okay? It is wrong and it is a crime not to pay your taxes. Right? So, in the future, in the event that you will become a businessman, okay, please remember this. Hindi porket wala kayong benepisyo na natatanggap sa gobyerno, hindi kayo magbabayad ng buwis. It is your obligation as a Filipino to pay your taxes. Diba? Kung ayaw nyo magbayad ng buwis, di lumayas kayo sa Pilipinas. Diba? Joke lang. Pero basically, kung ayaw nyo magbayad ng buwis sa Pilipinas, lumayas kayo. Diba? Yun lang yun. Right? Or huwag kayong tumapak sa Pilipinas. Huwag kayong tumapak sa lupa ng Pilipinas. Right? Lumipad kayo, parang bird. Okay? Or kalapati na mababa ang lipad. Okay? Next. Another theory is what we call the lifeblood theory. Taxes are the lifeblood of the government Being such, their prompt and certain availability is imperious needs. Okay? Without taxes, the government would be paralyzed for lack of motive power to activate or operate it. Lifeblood theory, meaning ang buwis natin ay ang dugong dumadaloy sa ugat ng ating gobyerno. At pag pinutol mo ang pagdaloy ng dugo ng ating gobyerno, okay, ano nangyayari sa tao pag naputulan ng ugat? Napaparalisado, di ba? Ano yung nangyayari? Na nai-stroke, right? Pag nawala ng dugo ang utak ng isang tao, nai-stroke siya. So, ganun din ang nangyayari sa gobyerno. Pag yung buwis ay pinutol mo, hindi mo binigay, okay? Hindi mo binigay sa gobyerno, napaparalisado ang ating gobyerno. Right? Okay, next. Inherent in sovereignty. Okay, the power of taxation is inherent in sovereignty as an incident or attribute thereof. Being essential to the existence of every government, it can be exercised by the government even if the Constitution is entirely silenced on the subject matter. Kahit yung konstitusyon natin hindi nakalagay doon kung ano yung tungkol sa ating mga batas, patungkol sa mga buwis, okay? Ang gobyerno ay may karapatan na magbuwis sa kanyang mga sinasakupan. Okay, inherent in sovereignty, the constitutional provision relating to the power of taxation do not operate as a grant of the power to the government. Hindi porket merong nakalagay sa constitution natin na binibigyang karapatan ng gobyerno, binibigyang karapatan ng konstitusyon ang gobyerno natin na magbuwis, yun yung kanyang kapangyarihan. Hinuhugot niya yung kanyang kapangyarihan because yun yung nakalagay sa constitution. That is wrong. Okay? Being a government, being a sovereign, okay, you are entitled, or the government of the Philippines is entitled to tax its people. Karapatan niya yon. Minanang karapatan niya yung inherent power to tax the people. So hindi kailangang nasa constitution yan. They merely constitute the limitation upon a power which would otherwise be practically without limit. Sinasabi ko nga sa inyo kanina, yung ating tax law or the National Income, NIRC, the National Internal Revenue Code of the Philippines is not a burden to us. It is not something that gives the government power to tax us, but it limited the power of the government to tax us. The train law, for example. The train law is an amendment of the National Internal Revenue Code. Tinaasan yung mga buwis natin doon sa train law. But the train law actually limits the power of the government to tax us more. Tumaas nga siya ng konti, pero it is a limitation to the government to tax us without limit. Naintindihan nyo? Okay? Please, what do you call it? Remember that. Lalabas yan sa quiz natin. Okay. Well, the power to tax is not expressly provided for in our Constitution. Its existence is recognized by the provision relating to taxation. Okay? In the case of Mactan Cebu International Airport versus Marcos, September 11, 1996, as an incident of sovereignty, the power to tax has been described as unlimited in its range, acknowledging in its very nature no limits. Okay, so that security against its abuse is to be found only in the responsibility of the legislative, which impose the tax on the constituent who are who are to pay it. Ito yung sinasabi nga natin, unlimited yung kapangyarihan ng gobyerno para buwisan tayo. The tax laws that we have is actually a limit to the government. Yung gobyerno ang nililimitahan noong tax laws na pinapatupad ng ating Kongreso. Hindi tayo yung pinahihirapan, kundi yung gobyerno yung nililimitahan. Okay? Although minsan yung paglilimit hindi masyadong masakit. Diba? Example, kagaya sa akin, nung medyo nasa construction company pa ako, ang limit sa akin ng gobyerno 33%, 35% ng kita ko ang tinataksan. Yun ang limit sa akin. Samantalang a person earning less than what I usually earn, ang tinatax lang sa kanya ay 20%. And lower than that, the government is only taxing him zero. Hindi siya kayang taksan ng gobyerno kasi mababa na yung kanya kita. Okay? Next. Okay. Legislative in character, the power to tax is exclusively legislative and cannot be exercised by the executive or judicial branch of the government. So we have three branches of government here in the Philippines. We have the executive, which is our president and his cabinet secretary. We have the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice and all the judges in the Philippines. Then we have the legislative, which is composed of two branches, which is the House of Representatives or our congressmen, and we have our upper house, which is the Senate of the Philippines. Okay? So ibig sabihin, ang nagpapatupad or ang gumagawa ng batas patungkol sa taxation ay hindi si BBM, hindi si Chief Justice Gismundo. Kung hindi, ang ating mga congressman at ang ating mga senador. Sila ang gumagawa ng batas sa ating taxation. Next. Subject to constitutional and inherent limitation, although in one decided case, the Supreme Court called it as an awesome power. The power of taxation is subject to a certain limitation. Most of these limitations are specifically provided in the Constitution or implied therefrom, while the rest are inherent and they are those which springs from the nature of the taxing power itself, although they may or may not be provided by the Constitution. So the limitation is in the tax laws, right? And some of it is provided in the Constitution. Okay, next. Scope of a legislative taxing power. Okay, so subject to taxation, okay, the person, property, or occupation, etc. to be taxed. So that is the subject of taxation. The person, the income tax of that person. Okay? Yung kita, yung sweldo ng tao. Second is the property, yung kanyang ari-arian. Okay? Next, amount or rate of the tax. So that is also a subject of the legislative power. Magkano ba yung ibubuwis sa tao? Right? Magkano yung ibubuwis? Example, our EVAT or extended value added tax. Nung panahon bago naging senador si Recto, ang ating value added tax is only 10%. Now, ang ginawa ni Recto, nag-sponsor siya para gawing 12% yung tax. Yung value added tax natin, yung VAT natin. So, nangyari, tumaas yung VAT natin from 10% to 12%. Dahil doon, natalo si Ralph Recto kapag ka-senador. Hindi na siya nanalo ulit. Okay, pero nakatakbo siya ulit, nanalo siya ulit. Okay, nakatakbo siya sa sumunod na eleksyon, nanalo naman siya. Pero nag-apologize pa siya, which is mali. Okay? Purpose of which tax shall be levied provided there are public purposes. Right? Example, sin tax. Para saan ang sin tax? Bakit mo tinataksan ang mga Bakit mo tinataksan ang alak, ang sigarilyo? Right? The purpose or the tax that is collected of the sin tax napupunta yan sa healthcare services natin. PhilHealth, napupunta yan sa mga hospital, and basically those kind of public purposes. Okay? A proportionment of the taxation, so hinati-hati nga natin yung taxes, right? So pag ang kita mo ay 250 and below, wala kang tax. Pag kumita ka ng 250 up to 400, 20%. 400 to 800, 25%. Diba? And so on and so forth. Situs of the taxation, meaning where it is located. And next is method of collection. How will you collect that? Okay, example, yung income tax natin is being collected by the government or by the BIR through withholding tax method. Meaning, pag kayo sumweldo, makikita nyo sa sweldo nyo, meron kayong withholding tax. Okay, yung mga employer natin, bilang our tax agent, wini-withhold na sa atin yun, binabawas na sa sahod natin yun. And nire-remit nila sa BIR. Right? So yung iba, yung mga VAT natin na tax, ang nangyayari dyan, yan ay wini-withhold ng ating mga retailers. Yung mga nagbebenta sa atin, binabawas na sa ating, o dinadagdag na sa bilihin natin yung VAT. At sila na yung nagbabayad sa gobyerno. Okay? Next.